major adventure. Shotgun. Okay. Wow. Here we go, guys. This is crazy. Oh my God.
Man, all you need is
Mom, put your seatbelt on.
all you need is 818. And this is a ride.
Are we going to a different dimension?
Welcome everybody to Left Reckoning 15. Can you believe it? This is going to be a really fun show. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Cael Brooks of Jacobin magazine, talking about his new piece, Going from Posting to Politics. And then a little bit later, we're going to be joined by Jim and Laura, who are the directors of the incredible documentary, which you all should be trying to find ways to see, Reclaim Idaho. A really important story about how, if you really dig your heels in and you go out into the community and you fight for something as righteous as expanding healthcare for people in need, nobody can stop you. Joined, as always, by my good friend, Matt Leck. How's it going, brother?
It's going pretty well, David. Good to be talking with you.
Yeah, man. It's been an interesting past few days. After these pretty difficult defeats we saw over the weekend, both in Alabama and also in Ecuador, mixed in with the kind of horrific scenes that we've been seeing in this country, in Minnesota, as people are fighting against police brutality. It's definitely, a moment where you have to take stock a little bit, and you have to remember that things are tough, but we're fighting, and there's a lot of really positive movements and things that are happening that have a lot of potential for winning. And I'm really excited to be talking about what happened in Idaho, because that's a really important fight. It's one that we covered a lot on TMBS and had Luke Mayville on a few times to talk about it. But it's a story that I think needs to be covered and understood more in the broader media, because
just for everyone's mental health, I think.
It's really well, the movie, that's what I was trying to say, is like the movie was such a sweet reminder, when I've been feeling a little bit down this week, of what is possible. And it's not always easy. It's not always straightforward what we have to do, but you can never give up the idea that mobilizing people can have really positive results.
Yeah, it's the work, and it, yeah, exactly. And that it can bear fruition in ways that you may be led to believe it is impossible is really inspiring.
Yeah. And, on that note, I wanted to start with some really impressive and inspiring movements that we're seeing continuing to happen right now. First of which has been this fight that we're seeing in Alabama, different from the Amazon strike. The Amazon union push, but a strike of around 1,100 mine workers in Tuscaloosa County, who are fighting for a fair contract after being, on the front lines of hyper exploitation from the company. They've now have been on strike for a significant period of time and have refused a contract that was negotiated by the higher ups in the union with the company, and are continuing to stay on strike. And we have this clip here from the great people at a More Perfect Union, which you should definitely follow and support if you aren't already.
They got to give us an answer. And they gonna give us a good contract. We ain't gonna take no bullshit.
In Alabama, over 1,000 mine workers are on strike at Warrior Met Coal.
Miners at the Brookwood coal mines have been on strike since April 1st.
The union says the miners helped get the company out of bankruptcy over the past 5 years, but have never received fair compensation for their efforts.
Man, come on, y'all. That's a slap in the face, man.
The workers are asking for new contract negotiations with better benefits.
No contract, no coal. It used to be a union job.
If you're a second late, they will send you home. And they don't realize the conditions that we go through to get them this coal.
You ain't down here because it's the best thing in the world to do. You here to have a better living for your family. That's why you risk it all when you go on the ground.
We're knee-deep water because they can't pump it. The coal mixes in with the water, and then they stick a water pump in there, but it's not water no more, it's slurry. And we're just pushing through it, keeping on going, keeping the company on our backs, you know.
I know y'all in, man. I love y'all, man. I like this.
And that's exactly it, is that every day, we have to just keep moving forward and continuing the fight and continuing the struggle. I know a lot of people have been feeling very devastated about, what happened with the Amazon union. I will just say this for folks who didn't catch my stream on Tuesday. There's no doubt about it that Amazon acted illegally, that it was a historic and an inspiring movement, regardless of the result, and that the fight is far from over. There's certainly going to be legal challenges that I thoroughly believe the union is going to win. And there are going to be more and more attempts to try to fight for a union, not just in Bessemer, Alabama, but across the country at Amazon facilities. As we talked about, last week, that it's already inspired a lot more militancy from workers all across the country, right? And that's something that's really important for people to hold on to, is that we're having these moments where we're testing our strength, and we're winning some and we're losing some, but we're on the field. And for a really long time, we weren't even playing, right? We were all just watching as spectators as Capitol was just trampling all over us. And now we have these moments where people are standing up and fighting. And we have to continue to support the fights as they're happening, and also do the kind of analysis afterwards to understand, okay, this is what's working and this is what isn't working, so that we can win. Because it's not just a moral imperative. It is literally a life and death imperative that we start winning and steamrolling these fights forward.
Yeah, like understanding they're uphill. The thing about the Amazon, and I'm wondering what your take on this is it wasn't just, the people who wanted the union who seemed to be optimistic in the chances for a union, but like Amazon's response itself just seemed really undisciplined for a massive behemoth, and like they were scared of it itself. And so it's like, even though it wasn't as close as we'd hoped, or even victory, it seems like they're not, like the discomfort with just being on the field is evident. And I'm just curious, like, what you think about that.
Well, I think that, especially when we were first covering it, we were very, quick to mention this is an uphill fight. This is going to be really hard, and Amazon's going to throw everything that they have. And Amazon did. And there's no doubt that the activities that Amazon did, both like illegal in the current law, and also, which I think, in an ideal world, if we're able to pass the PRO Act, would be illegal. Two things that are technically legal today, they wouldn't be able to do if we are able to pass the PRO Act. It's one of those things. It's like, if you're a super strong force like Amazon, you think you can just intimidate people without ever having to go onto the field, go into that kind of confrontation. And I think that really took Amazon back, is like, okay, we actually now have to put out the big guns. We have to flex our muscle to be able to swat this away. And I think people should realize, like, we made them flinch.
Yeah.
And it should be inspiring to people instead of something that people are taking as a negative.
Yeah. And just how offensive it is that, like, and you saw it in the last clip, these used to be union jobs. And we heard this with warehouse jobs that were unionized in Alabama as well. And Amazon coming in and all their propaganda about the $15 minimum wage. Well, it's like, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, it definitely, like, people are realizing that they're having something taken away, and they are going to fight against that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight a couple more of these fights too, because it's like, one, it's incredible just what's going on, in Alabama, and solidarity to the people on the ground, and to our friends at the Valley Labor Report for covering this, Kim Kelly and all these folks who've been doing this great work covering this incredible moment in Alabama. But I also just want to shout out too that we're seeing this in Los Angeles. We are seeing Teamsters going out on strike, shutting down portions of the Port of Los Angeles, seeing incredible solidarity from workers across the board there, even from different companies, to make sure that people's rights are protected, to make sure that people get the bare minimum, COVID protection that they should have been getting from the get-go, making sure that the bosses and these companies that profit off of all these people's labor understands that, like, at the end of the day, the workers really do have the power, and an organized workforce is something that can demand a lot more than we're getting today. And did you have, by the way, this James Connolly thing?
Oh, yes, I do.
Or did you want to save it? Because what was so exciting about this, this Los Angeles move was that you started to see that immediate solidarity between some of the workers who were on strike and just Teamsters across the board, which is why they were able to expand the strike action to really hit at, a central hub of American capital, which is the port of Los Angeles. And I don't know if you have this and you just sort of wanted to read through it, but like we did a thing on James Connolly with Paul O'Connell for patrons, which people should definitely check out. And it was really interesting to hear, James Connolly talk about the potential of labor when labor, expands from just like being like a, shop by shop consciousness. Like, okay, these are my brothers because we work at the same, shop floor, the same even industry, to like across the board working class solidarity where like, he's talking about strikes. Where is it in one of the Nordic countries? I can't remember. The top of my head.
Yes, he's talking about Scandinavian socialism, and just as an image of a better world, images of better worlds are important, particularly if they come from this actual planet. And this is one of the more amazing ones I've been exposed to in a while. So he writes, contrast this woeful picture of a divided and disorganized unionism in America with the following account from the New York Sun of the manner in which the socialist unionists in Scandinavia stand together in a fight against the common enemy, irrespective of craft interests or craft concerns. And this quote's from this article now, which is, this is meant to be a bad thing, but it just sounds badass. A short sojourn in Scandinavia, particularly in Copenhagen and the southern part of Sweden, gives one an object lesson in socialism. In some way or other, the socialists have managed to capture all the trade unions in these parts, and in between them have caused a reign of terror for everybody who is unfortunate enough to own a business of any sort. Heaven help him if he fires one of his helps or tries to assert himself in any way. He is immediately declared in blockade. This socialist term means practically the same as a boycott. If the offending businessman happens to be a retail merchant, all workmen are warned off his premises. The drivers for the wholesale houses refuse to deliver goods at his store. The truckmen refuse to cart anything to or from his place, and so on. In fact, he is a doomed man unless he comes to terms with the union. It is worth mentioning, it goes on and on. Check out Socialism Made Easy for the full one there. But I just love that as first of all, the Nordic countries, the way they're talked about in discourse nowadays, like that image is not there. It's not evident, and I think we should bring a little bit of that back.
No, and exactly, and that's what's possible when you have like a really strong and militant unionism, across the country, and also like that working class consciousness. And just last, because I just think it's worth shouting out too, to talk about the potentials of these movements. So we talked about the inspiration we're seeing in Alabama. We're talking about another inspiration that we're seeing in California, but also that kind of cross the board support. This is political labor movements and like what they can do in the fight against state abuse. And we've all been watching in horror, seeing what's happening in Minneapolis, where obviously this very clear, and I'll say it, very clear murder of another young person by the police is being ignored and swept under the rug by the state. And as people are demanding these people, these murders being held accountable, the state is coming back at them with a brutal arm. And we've seen these horrible images of the National Guard showing up, treating people in their own country as if they're occupying them. And do you have this up, Matt?
Yeah, I'll put this up now.
So people were floating this around that the National Guard appeared to be using the St. Paul Regional Labor Federation building as like a launching, as like a strategic hub to coordinate their activities around town. And Durs Proact, or Dursquist, is up here on his Twitter handles, says, "We made them leave," and goes on to tell the story about how organized labor in the area went in and they demanded that their voice be heard, and they held a vote, and they kicked the National Guard out of this facility. They said that they will not let the National Guard use their facilities to oppress and wage war against their fellow citizens and human beings in the streets.
And then I just love this victory photo here as well. I mean, this should be encouraged. Great job.
And I think, and just so folks know, I think that this is a struggle that's going to continue there specifically with this building. I think that there's sort of a pushback from some of other parts of the union against it. But the point here is, one, celebrating that victory, and then two, it's like, this is the kind of strategic thinking that we're talking about when we were saying increasing union power is important, not just for bettering working conditions and wages, but it allows us to organize, politically. And what I mean by that is like standing up against police brutality in the streets. That's a political activity. When we're talking about politics, we're not just talking about going and voting and who you're endorsing, all that kind of stuff. It's a political activity to march in the streets and to stand up against the police there.
Yeah, and God bless and be safe anybody who's doing that.
Absolutely. So this is just the inspiring stuff, and I just want people to understand it's like, we've had some setbacks, but there's a lot of activity that's happening. There's a lot of things that we can take inspiration from, and hell, we got to take inspiration from one another if we're going to be able to win this hard slog. I'll just say this again, because I always get mad when people misinterpret what I mean by this. We are in a difficult position where our opponents have a hell of a lot of power. They're very organized and they're entrenched within the state. Taking that on is not going to be something that is going to be easy. It's not going to be something that's just going to happen sporadically, or just because everyone has a moment out of spontaneity, they all wake up and are going to shut down this system. It's going to happen through serious organizing and commitment and strategy, right? And discipline. And people mistake that sometimes with me saying, this is going to take 100 years, or this is going to take 50 years, or hell, even 10 years. I'm not even making a timeline argument. I'm just saying, look at where we are now and understand what we need to do to get to where we want to be. And just know that it's just not going to happen overnight. So you have to, do understand that so that we can have those political victories. But I'm just saying to you as an individual listening to this, you can't let your heart be broken, on every up and downs, because there's going to be a lot of them going forward.
Yeah.
Right. And you just have to always be able to dig in deep and know that you're in the fight for the right things, that there's a lot of potential and it can happen and it will happen. But you just can't fall into, what I've called before, like left pessimism, right? Where you just start to get too bummed out because people aren't doing what you want them to do. It's a long fight. We're going to win. But just know that it's not always going to be easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think to talk about that.
About pessimism? No, I totally agree. I mean, it's hard like you said, in this current moment with, cops literally raising blue line flags, and people like having to act like they don't know what that means. But again, the AFL-CIO has police unions as part of their membership. Mm-hmm. That they would have taken that measure, I think, is laudatory. And like you said, that's going to be a continuing fight. There's no permanent victories, right? No
permanent victories. I mean, that's another, and we don't even need to get into that, but there are no permanent victories on there.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you hit the nail on the head whenever you talk about this left pessimism stuff.
Well, to bring the mood up, we're going to bring in our good friend and comrade, Cael Brooks, to talk about his most recent piece in Jacobin magazine. For folks who aren't familiar with Cael is my editor at Jacobin when we do videos for Jacobin's YouTube channel. He's also coming in disguise as Bhaskar Sankara.
This is the face of white socialism right here. It's my name. There we go.
No, we're really happy to have Cael. Again, if people aren't familiar, you should definitely check out Cael's work. He is the producer and editor of all the great shows and content that they put up on the Jacobin YouTube channel, and also the writer of a great new piece in Jacobin magazine called From Posting to Politics. How's it going, Cael?
Doing well. I'm doing pretty well. I was listening to the beginning of the show. I feel like I'm just now going to come in and hype up everything you just said, David. I don't know what else I can add after that.
They've just got a tight 4 minutes on left pessimism. That really,
I do, because I just the thing is though, is sometimes people ask me for personal advice with being happy. It's I can't help you out there, but I could tell you that if you take the long view of these things, that you can put these things in a little bit more perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, just a sense of where, situate yourself as a leftist at any other decade in history, and like not great situation there either. So I think that perspective is really important to recognize what sort of possibilities there are now, even as they're all being crushed right before our eyes.
Well, but anyways, let's get to this piece and this argument, because I actually think it's pretty good. Cale, I don't know if you have this prepped, Matt, but
got it up here.
Everyone has different feelings about online, but there are some strategies that work and some strategies that don't. And I know that this is something that's very much in Cale's wheelhouse. He's very passionate against social media, but you do appreciate good posts and their ability to change hearts and minds, right?
It's visceral. How can you not appreciate a good post?
Like this one.
Like, yeah, can you...
I'm like looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, so I need to give me 1 second, and I'll be able to show it to both of you, because I need to do a 2-step process here. Everyone else will see it before you guys, and then I'll share it with you. Here it is. Come on.
I can just read it.
Oh, here it is. Finally, there. Dave, if you want to read it for the YouTube or the Twitter.
Dawn 2021. Hello, POTUS. Please embrace Marxist-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought.
I mean, you got to shoot your shot, right?
You got to shoot
exactly.
your shot.
It's in his mentions now.
But obviously, I mean, that's one is a joke post. But when you're talking about like the potential that we have using online, like organizing and the kind of historical moment that we're at, you're talking about something very differently than just hoping like tweeting slogans out at elected officials is going to change their hearts and minds about politics, right, Cale?
Yeah, no. I think that's probably the most low hanging fruit, of course. That I mean, it's kind of the fantasy of some people, or it's kind of like this funny. Some of it is somewhat real, of course, that you can just tweet at like celebrities, at politicians, and there is a chance that they will see that. But obviously, that's not, I don't think anyone serious really believes that someone seeing a tweet that says, hey, can you please do this thing, is going to do that much as far as like changing a political trajectory or changing a program or something. A lot of what I'm referring to is, I mean, this is an essay basically for the left. This is by and for the left. And so it's trying to understand our moment that we're in, where, of course, a lot of the left, which the American left today is pretty middle class, a lot of us have been indoors during COVID. Obviously, there's exceptions to that people have been out in the streets throughout the year for various protests, obviously a lot this past summer. And people are knocking on doors. There's a fairly robust Tax the Rich campaign here in New York City with the local DSA chapter. That's happening, and that's important. But again, I think that's kind of those are the exceptions. A lot of what's going on right now, of course, has to be online. And one of the things that I do is in the article, and what I've said before is basically that two things. One, we should understand online mediums, online tools as basically instrumental, that these are things that we can use, but that, and sometimes it is very useful. I mean, I cite like the West Virginia teacher strike, that it was important that they could link up all these different schools across the state using Facebook groups. That's, of course, useful in that particular circumstance. And there's going to be others that are like that. But I think the medium itself and these mediums, the technology itself is not capable of doing the basics of left and socialist political organizing, which is that you have to actually reach out and meet other people who disagree with you. And you have to make the case for them that in the face of all the different options in front of them, they have a particular material and political circumstance that they're living within, and they have different choices in front of them. Some that are more individualistic, of I'm going to hold my head down. I'm just going to, try to advance in my particular job. I'm not going to upset the boss. Or it might be, hearing from some, right-wing guru or something about, well, actually the path to salvation is by cleaning your room and, fixing your house first and all those things. Or, more collective options that say, we actually have so much more to gain by you and me and others linking up and fighting for our collective material interests. Now, the problem with that, of course, the reason why people don't automatically do that, why workers don't automatically do that, is because capitalism front loads all of the risk and all of the challenges that go into that effort up front. Because if you are thinking of organizing, you might immediately face the wrath of your employer, which, again, in capitalism, we are dependent on our employers because they own all the stuff that provides our sustenance, our food, our clothing, our housing, that we are renting, we're buying, we end up having to sell our labor to them to get all these other things. So you're basically, by going the collective route, immediately saying, I'm going to war with the person that provides all the things that keeps me alive, right? And it's political organizers that make the case that you have so much more to gain by us collectively organizing together. And I just don't think that social media has that capacity, and not just social media, but just the online world, the online tools, the various kinds of websites, the various organizing tools. I mean, again, it's means to ends in the same way that, political education, this is kind of my main example throughout this, political education ultimately at its best has to be a means to a greater ends, and people should be using it for those ends, for organizing. But in and of itself, it has limitations. And so it's, in some sense, I kind of understood this as a fairly evergreen argument of like, we're stuck inside for the time being, but as, people are getting vaccinated, as we can get outside, we have to be talking to people who don't already agree with us. Yeah, I have more, obviously, but
yeah, no, it does seem like a common sense sort of view that seems to get obscured by like consultants, basically, right? Like Adolph Reed talks about this. I heard him on This Is Revolution talk about the importance of in-person meetups. In this documentary, Reclaim Idaho, it's all about going across the state to literally let people see you in real life.
And just to add to, keep going, Matt, but like, like in union campaigns too, like having those kind of in-person showings of of solidarity and support mean a lot. Posting and seeing videos is great, but seeing people in your community wandering around and supporting you means a lot more to you than just a kind of idea that there's people out there watching.
Yeah, and you think about like the videos for like Biden or even the NFL players, which were great, but like imagine if any of those guys went and showed up in Bessemer or something like that.
Right. Well, and solidarity requires real relationships with one another. Right. And this is something that Jay McAlevey, in her postmortem of the Bessemer Amazon Union Drive, she puts this very plainly that, effectively a lot of what ended, well, in total, not assigning agency, but just in total, most of the effort around that campaign ended up being a lot of the media attention. There's a lot of social media posts. Obviously, groups like DSA, like important left groups in the US were behind this, left political figures were behind this. And that's all really useful. And like, we don't discount that at all. It's important to have those. And I think you would, like, to be successful, you're going to need that. But at the end of the day, because these workers in this workshop, at the warehouse, they ultimately said, not like, oh, I don't deserve a raise. They didn't say, I don't deserve greater job security. They said, I'm not going to challenge my employer because there's going to be far greater repercussions against me. And online, social media, regular media, like, these are not enough to reassure people that they actually have a chance at this fight.
And I would just, this is something that you and I have talked about, privately many times. It's one of those things, especially if you're like organizing, like in the South, for example, all these people think like, oh, all of these voters, these working class people, they're like, oh, they don't want Medicare for all, they don't want this or that or that. It's like, no, a lot of people just like don't think that it's possible. And I think that the way that and what that means is that like your tactics for winning support and organizing around that are very different than just saying like, oh, we have to convince people that these are like the best policies. A lot of what we're trying to do is like, we can do this. It's possible. You're not going to get fired for joining a union. You know, you're not going to see repercussions because a lot of people are worried when they see any kind of change happen in their environment, be it political or in the workplace, and taught by their real experience, that's probably going to be a bad thing, given, you know, decades and decades of like neoliberalism, right? Any big change is probably not going to be to your benefit, right? So the difference between, you know, what online organizing and engagement is so much about like having dialogue and discourse and changing minds potentially, versus like building community and having organizations and face-to-face, community. I mean, function is sort of the word that I'm searching for here. Really does have so much more effect than just showing, you know, a strong presence online.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's not to say that, like, obviously I'm the video editor at Jacobin, like that it's my job to produce videos, but I mean, I like kind of push Bhaskar into creating this because I do think there's a great deal of use for the left and for the world, inevitably, to have left political education in video format. And so again, this is something I go into. I mean, there's kind of a dual function of what we do. I mean, all three of us, that I think on the one hand, there's that media that is meant for, you know, someone who doesn't already agree with us. And it's meant to introduce people to our political perspective, that being a socialist means that you have a socialist worldview, that you understand the relations between people, between things, between the employer and the employees, and understand that capitalism is an actual, real, abstract, but real phenomenon in the world. And we make the case that you can understand the world like clearly through this lens, and it actually will have greater explanatory power over what actually happens in people's lives. But we then also frame it, we kind of frame a political question in order to then say, well, this is the problem, and these are the particular solutions that are available, and this is what we're, you know, this is the diagnosis, this is the prognosis, and this is how we're advocating that we move forward. And that's important, right?
Oh no, I mean, I would just, you know, add and keep going there. Like, I remember very vividly, like Fernando Haddad, when he came to New York after losing to Bolsonaro, he was in a conversation with Yanis Varoufakis. And, you know, and this is not like a dig at Haddad, but he went and did the kind of classic, you know, argument that we were seeing from a lot of losses that the left had, and, you know, also like the kind of more center left too, to like these like right figures during this period of time. What is that? It's like, it's fake news and technology are beating us, and so we can't beat technology. And Giannis was just like, no, like if these are tools that are being used by our opponents and they're beating us on that battlefield, we can't use that as an excuse. These are tools, these are, you know, things, you know, and you're giving them like a kind of essence instead of recognizing that these are tools that our opponents are just using at a much better than we're using them currently.
Right. I mean, Matt, looks like you want to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, it is like these are probably the largest propaganda machines in the history of the world, right? Like, and of course you can't just leave them. And like, I reflect a lot on the part, you know, Cale, where you're talking about only 85% of people follow this stuff very closely. And I think that's really important to remember. Like when...
Or the opposite. Yeah, only 15%.
Right, exactly. Only 15% follow it very closely, and 85% are very casual. And that, to me, it's never been a surprise that people could have voted for Donald Trump. People could have voted for Trump, because like chances are they probably saw him more on The Apprentice than they did on the campaign trail. And so I think that's always important to keep in mind. And, you know, as just to speak in my part of the spectacle, like majority report is more spectacle focused. And like I think the way you talk about political education is important, because to the extent that there are people there And if that is any kind of entry point, like if people, oh, I'm going to be political now, so I'm going to watch Trevor Noah and The Daily Show, right? I know that there's some truth to my journey in that. To the extent that I think there's use in engaging in that, it is just to catch those eyeballs on these massive, machines and then direct them to a better understanding of the world, basically.
Right. And ultimately, I mean, did I freeze?
You did freeze.
No, yeah.
There you are. Now you're good.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry. That's just censorship. Yeah, I mean, but, ultimately you want people to be engaged with a left political project. And the more that they're engaged, the better. So clicking on a video, clicking on a post is extremely limited. It's a very, YouTube is just like a big buffet of all these different interesting, there's cat videos, there's us, there's Peterson, there's some stuff on science, whatever, you'll just click through and you find things that you find interesting and you move on. That's where I think, honestly, people make sometimes a little bit too much about the right-wing presence on YouTube, because most of these people are not proposing a political platform. They're just speaking to really alienated people with reactionary, bad, awful ideas. But at the end of the day, it's something that is reflecting a reality in people's lives, that they are in fact alienated. They do feel like they're getting the short end of the stick, and then they're giving them the worst, most distorted and unpleasant answer to that. But it's always going to be an easy one of oh, you feel bad? Well, fuck them. Fuck that person.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, a lot of what we do on the left and with our political education, of course, we have to have a greater sense of rigor and accuracy, because the system is rigged against us effectively, that it favors, blocks of capital accumulating greater and greater capital, that corporations are going to make profits, and media that says, yeah, you're just an individual in the world, and you should just be the best you can be, and it's the Muslims' fault if XYZ happens. That is just completely compatible with the current economic and political systems, whereas everything that we're doing is challenging how the actual systems function, because we understand, but we believe normatively, but we also understand that it systematically creates injustices. And so we have to then create both an analysis of how it actually works, not just the appearance of the system, but the actual essence of what's going on underneath it, and then offer counter solutions. And we have a variety of solutions. Some of them are better than others. And I think that's where the second function of political education comes in, which is that we have to actually have, in absence of greater left political institutions, we need things like our YouTube channels to actually foster a healthy political culture, intellectual culture, that there's some sticky stuff that we got to talk through. And to the best of our abilities as individuals on the left and online, we have to not be afraid to address these things and try to work through okay, what really is the most accurate analysis of what's going on right now, and how do we as a left progress so that we can actually be in that better world that we keep talking about.
Yeah, and I think one of the difficult aspects that I'm sure you've considered too is that the tools we're using weren't designed by us, right? And YouTube and social media in
they're
general,
designed to rate chicks.
YouTube very much, and Cale sent us a piece about kind of X alt-right guy who was making YouTube videos, and it's interesting to read through their strategies and see oh, this is what this kind of platform does try to incentivize, right? Which is conflict, trying to chase after the algorithm. So whatever's like the hot thing of the day, making sure that you're getting, videos out on time, even if they're just sort of vaguely connected to it. Right. And it's like, too, like, and I like that what you're saying about like it not necessarily being dominated, but the fact is when people are going on here and searching for political topics in general, they're not first typically landing on like this channel or Jacobin or anything like that. They're usually, at worst, like a Jordan Peterson kind of situation,
PragerU,
or PragerU, and then not ideal either, some kind of like Pod Save America, like zombie clone kind of thing, right? So it is difficult to try to find a way to build, to sort of wade through that and to sort of do the kind of political education that's needed, while also, existing in an area where they're trying to, make you do something completely different.
Right.
I mean, like, just as well as I do that, for example, like thumbnails, like you have to like make, these like insane, like shock faces to get, clicks or things like that. If you do anything on like I think, I love doing videos on Bill Gates, because I think it's good to, come after billionaires by name. But it is also interesting because you get a whole different, traffic source, and you can see it from the comments that we get. A lot of them are like people like, well, wow, this is interesting. You could see that maybe some things are percolating, and then also just like crazy town like conspiracy theories about like, how did you not talk about the fact that like he's behind 5G and all this kind of stuff. It's like, you don't need conspiracy. We literally just told you why he's a bad guy. He controls a lot of things, but I don't know, you realize how like those systems work as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple thoughts to that. On the one hand, like you're saying, I mean, it's one thing to say, we see a mirage in front of us and we can intellectually say, well, we know what this is. It's not a real thing. It's an optical illusion going on in front of us. But the fact that you know how something works doesn't mean that you don't see the appearance still. Mm-hmm. And so we still, as people making content on the left, still have to abide by the general rules of how to make content. And so like you're saying with like something like thumbnails or we try not to do clickbait, but every once in a while we had some clickbaity titles, and
even just the way you keep on a weekly schedule, like that sort of thing it really controls your time. And that's because if you don't, you'll fall off. Unless you're one of these massive YouTubes, you basically need to keep regular output. And Twitch, I hear, is the same way. If you're not on there, 8 hours a week, you're like not even on there basically.
Right. Yeah. And then going back to the other thing of, conspiracy theories, again, people are going to believe things that meet their reality. That I think whenever you, that was just too much to handle. It was like a spit take. But
I can't see my glass in front of me because of my microphone. See, all these perceptions of me.
That's right. Everything's an illusion, folks. No, but I think like to be on the left, your starting point, your starting premise when you look out at, your fellow human beings in society is to say that, most of these people, the vast majority of these people are good people. They want good outcomes. They have people that they care about and love, and there's people who care about and love them. Again, maybe not every single person, but the vast majority of people are fairly rational. They're not like ultra maximalist rational that you sometimes get on like the right-wing version of this, but people are rational. Like they, most people are not going to say, I'm just going to go sleep outside tonight instead of in my home. Like I'm going to, there's a good sense of like, I have to do those things that keep me surviving day to day, week to week, month to month. And they do, given good options, I think most people would in fact pick good outcomes for themselves and others. And I think you have to have some sense or some basis, or that should be your basis to understand humanity and society if you're a socialist, because you want to build a society that's based on, people working together, finding commonalities, building upon common interests. you know, I really do think that most people are in fact good people.
Yeah.
And then from that, you then have to explain, well, why do they go to a conspiracy theory? Why do they go to the right? Why do they, when, you know, they're in the Bessemer unionization drive, why do they vote against the union? And it's so easy to say in any of these situations, oh, they're stupid. They, you know, they want to hurt others. They want a bad outcome. They don't know what's in their best interest. And I think you have to immediately reject that. In some cases, in some particular cases, maybe that's true, but I think a lot of that's pathological, and pathologies are by definition not the norm. I think for most people, they try to do their best to navigate the world with the available information they have, and a lot of information is bullshit or misinformation. And that's again part of why we do political education. But I think the left, if it's to progress in this moment, has to deal with real people and their real material interests and their real ideologies that they understand the world through. And so we see it incumbent on us to make the case to them that actually we're not crazy people, that we have sensible political solutions to both the particular situations they're in and in a much like grander scale. Like we have a vision of where we're going as a society. And again, that's on us, like to make the case to others. Absolutely. And so when people don't agree with us, we should maybe not in every case, but more often than not, understand it as a failing on our part to not be reaching people where they're at and finding a way to actually talk to people. And so I guess my last thought on this is just, I think the left should try to do its best to avoid all the culture war stuff. Like, you know, some stuff is truly unavoidable but for the most part, I think a lot of it, you try to be agnostic on it and say, listen, that's fine, but I have a much bigger and more important political issue right now that I think you would also care about. And you listen to them, but you make your case for, you know, let's not focus on this kind of, you know, it's some, you know, do you have the right consumer choice or not? Are you buying the right thing or not? Like, it's, you know, are you getting what you deserve in your job? Do you have the healthcare that you need based on your medical conditions?
Well, and you know, we're going to be playing in a little bit this conversation we had with the folks at Reclaim Idaho, but that's exactly what they did there. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Cale, but you know, they got Medicaid expansion because one, they refused to hire a bunch of political consultants, was like the first big choice, and then they said, we're just going to drive around the state. And you know, Idaho, I mean, is a well, I mean, it's a lot of space to drive across, but like, you know, it's not Texas or California. It's also like less people that you have to speak to. But what they were able to do was, okay, we'll talk to these people about why expanding Medicaid is beneficial to you. People think, oh, that's a good idea. Then they would say, hey, would you like to talk to folks? And they were able to not only, you know, reach a lot of people through this strategy, just like the main organizers, but get a lot of other people involved. You know, who are knocking on doors in their own communities. And then they got more and more. I mean, it's like the perfect kind of grassroots campaign in that sense. And that was so much more effective than any kind of like good ad. It's so much more deeply rooted in the community. And it's a great baseline, I think, for, you know, for doing political organizing in, you know, in any space. And, you know, that's one thing that the DSA, not to be like super, I mean, for people who haven't worked on political campaigns, that's one thing that the DSA is like very, you know, skilled at, especially early on, was like just having this like great army of like door knockers that would be an asset to any campaign, instead of just having to hire people for $10 an hour, whatever the hell they typically pay canvassers or not. You know, but like thinking about politics on that level, because what they were able to do there too is like, this is a Republican state, and they just talked to people and they met them at their level without having this kind of preconceived notion of which way the conversation was going to go. And a lot more people were convinced than if they were just doing, okay, we're just going to talk to people who identify as Democrat on, you know, on our van system.
Right. I mean, that's the the lasting beauty of the Twin Sanders campaigns. That on the one hand, we now it's not a ever permanent thing, but we know that our political platform of expanding public goods, of decommodifying things that should be human rights in this country and around the world, and having greater say, greater control over your life in the workplace and beyond, is overwhelmingly popular. Like, and Sanders was able to demonstrate that, and it also got all of us, and a lot of us, it was the first time being politically engaged, but it got us to go knock on doors and talk to real people and get a sense of those who live near us, those who don't live near us, to understand like where people actually are, and it's pretty different from what you see in the media. Like that's just the top 20% of this country just arguing with itself, and the vast majority of people are somewhere very different.
Yeah, the culture war point just makes me cringe thinking back to Kamala Harris making a campaign issue out of banning Trump's Twitter account. And it's just like, to anybody who doesn't follow this stuff closely, that's just insane. Especially like you got 1 or 15% chance that people are going to be paying attention to you, and that's the foot forward you're going to be putting in.
Isn't it remarkable she's the vice president? Like I just saw her face on a magazine. It was like, oh yeah, that's right. This person that no one voted for because no one really liked her ended up vice president.
Yeah,
it might be more than that by the end of it. I don't know. I don't know. Good luck, Joe, but I'm worried about Joe. Is all I'm saying.
No, but it's funny. I mean, you even saw like, not to be too online, but like Chelsea Clinton was going on recently about, oh, Donald Trump needs to post pictures of him taking the vaccine. And it's just like, who is this for? Honestly, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people who are really struggling right now without having Trump as like a figure in media to just fixate on all the time. Because that's all, mainstream media was doing for 4 years. But
there's a lot of people losing a lot of money right now. Like CNN, just their profits dipped hard after Trump left, because that's all they gave a shit about.
I was hanging out with some older family members, and I didn't say anything, but they were saying like, yeah, I'm not watching the news anymore. I just feel so relieved. I don't have to watch TV every night to see what Donald Trump did wrong. Oh, and I didn't feel like getting in the middle of that. But I was just like, this is, I'm sure, something that's happening all around the country, that all these people were just tuning out, who are watching this stuff religiously and just getting, it was like the image of it, watching. I don't know if you ever, spent time with anybody in your family or
with your family,
who just would just sit and watch for, hours, just like, getting really worked up about every move. And like, people who are listening to this, don't misunderstand this. Not that you shouldn't have been outraged at a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump did, but it was just like a drip feed constantly.
Yeah.
And it had very little to do with politics. Oftentimes it's like, oh, Donald Trump mispronounced this, or like, he failed to do this, important tradition of the White House. And,
he called Steve Jobs or Tim Cook, Tim Apple.
Which like that stuff is
cool.
funny. Like you should be watching that because it's hilarious.
I miss him actually.
Right, but it's like, but very often, yeah. I mean, there's like real serious problems, obviously, with the Trump, or there was. Were we just still in the Trump administration? I mean, there were major problems with the Trump administration that, like, the only available public responses to those were from liberals who, again, everything then becomes about, at the individual level, like, are you a good or a bad person? Do you agree with the president or do you not agree with the president? Are you going to buy the thing that supports the president or not? Like, it's not politics. None of that was politics.
Wait, so I should return my David Hogg pillow? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, if it's a good pillow, keep it.
No,
but we all got to buy pillows.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Matt Karp's piece on like Gilded Age politics was really good on this. He's like, like politics are something that's felt very viscerally by people. They're very passionate about it, but like the actual scope of debate is probably smaller, than it's been in a really long time for folks who really follow this. Cael, we'll definitely have to do this again. sometime soon. Maybe get you on a post game and just sort of mess around, watch some clips. Because I like to be able to show Cale things, online things, since he's not really catching all of it. Like, there's a lot of memes we could fill Cale in on.
Yeah, that's funny, because that reminds me of my friend who doesn't have any social media, and like half of whenever I would meet up with him, it's just like, apparently this happened, and showing him an online thing.
I know what's going on. I have shooters. I got people who are looking out for me. I just don't have to. I don't scroll. That's the difference. So you guys should just get the right WhatsApp chats, and you'll be good.
Interesting, yeah.
I like to have my hand in the river looking for gold, man. You never know what you're gonna find. But anyways, folks, if you haven't already, check out Jacobin Magazine's YouTube channel. You can see Cale's work both front and center and also behind the scenes there on weekends on the Jacobin Show and all of the quick takes and other videos that they do there. I really appreciate having you on, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure as always. Good seeing you both.
Yeah, good seeing you again.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
All right, that was great. Good to see Cale again.
It's fun seeing Cale. Cale's the man. For folks who aren't familiar, to make that clear, like Cale edits all those little Jacobin quick takes that I do, and they're always really funny conversations where we basically do that for like an hour, just talk about whatever's like on our heads, and then we're like, oh shit, we have to record this video. It was fun. It was fun having that be something that we can record and put out.
Yeah. Monetize it
instead of the work just starting now. But we're about to move to this Reclaim Idaho conversation. I just want to do a couple of quick kind of announcements for folks. For patrons this Sunday, we're going to be doing a live think tank. So if you haven't already, get your not a live think tank, we're going to be releasing a think tank. So get your questions in. You can either post those on Patreon or in the Discord. Get those in before like tomorrow afternoon, because I think we might be recording it then. Also, if you haven't already signed up to patreon.com/leftreckoning, you really should. We're really upping our game there, doing these Sunday shows now. This new think tank that's coming out this weekend will be really good. And also you should be checking out our interview with Paul Connolly on James Connolly, which is really apt for a lot of the things that we've been doing lately.
It really is. It's like, it's suspiciously so, Dave. It's like you almost invented James Connolly for the purposes of these as a propaganda vehicle. But yeah, no, great stuff. Socialism made easy, and he's not joking.
It's really incredible stuff. And also, suggestions on any thinkers or guests that you would like us to have for those. We are really interested in all of y'all's opinions. And as always, reach out to me about anything, anytime. I try to be as available as possible. But before we move to all this Reclaim Idaho stuff too, it just has to be said, and we'll do some celebration about this in the post game. But a big Lula Livre, as we saw another big victory today with the equivalent of the Supreme Court of Brazil basically throwing out all of these charges. So they had already been annulled, but there was one more kind of legal hurdle, one more potential snag in Lula just being completely free of these charges and the horrible specter that has been Lava Jato. Incredible news. He's really he's lined up very, very well to take on Bolsonaro in the upcoming Brazilian election, where he's already leading, if I'm correct, in these early polls by like 20%.
It's opening a nice big lead.
So, I mean, you wonder sometimes, and I don't want to speculate too wildly, but you wonder sometimes if Bolsonaro might be too afraid to even run against Lula, just because he doesn't want to get trounced.
Smacked,
without the help of Sergio Moro and this horrible U.S. backed effort to prevent Lula da Silva from being the president of Brazil. I mean, there's no chance that we would have been saying the words President Bolsonaro. So I'm really looking forward.
How good Lula defeats Bolsonaro headline.
I mean, that's going to feel really hard. And we desperately need it. So that's just some exciting news. And we'll talk a little bit, I think next week on the show, we're definitely going to be doing a kind of deep dive into Bessemer, Alabama. I figured at this point, it's just not good to just do too many hot takes on that when we can have constructive conversations. So we're trying to work on getting some more in-depth conversations around that for next week. I also think we might be trying to do some more in-depth conversations around Ecuador. We'll talk a little bit about that after we put on this conversation that we had with Jim and Laura about the Reclaim Idaho doc. But we'll also be doing a more in-depth segment on that next week. But we'll do a little bit before we go to the post game tonight.
Cool. Yeah. So once this interview ends, we'll be coming back.
But we need to set this up a little bit, just for folks who are familiar. If you haven't watched the interviews that we've done with Luke Mayville on the Michael Brooks show, and you aren't familiar with what happened in Idaho, let me just give you the quick rundown. There was an opportunity to pass a ballot initiative in the state to expand Medicaid, and we'll talk about what the Medicaid gap is during the interview, so you'll get that explanation a little bit later. But I just wanted people to make sure that they knew this, because we didn't really go through it at the beginning of the interview. This won overwhelmingly in a Republican-held state.
65-35.
Yeah, 65-35 to expand Medicaid. And, with a lot of pushback from the GOP, and also, if we're going to put our own editorial on it, not a tremendous amount of help from the state Democratic Party either. This was an incredible movement that brought in a lot of people, as we were talking about earlier, not just to show up and vote, but to volunteer. And it won, as we said, by a huge margin. It was a really exceptional move that got healthcare to a lot of folks. I believe the number that they're estimating is around 90,000 people now have healthcare coverage because of this Medicaid expansion. That's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that really changed people's lives for the better. And before we play this, I just wanted to fill people in, because this victory really shook the people in power in the state of Idaho, and they have been working, the GOP has been working there to prevent ballot initiatives from being something that is successful in the future. And the GOP was able to pass a bill that would basically virtually make it impossible to have ballot initiatives. I think it's one of those things where you would have to have 6% of the eligible voters in every county in the state of Idaho, which is a standard that no other state that has ballot initiatives has.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It should be a minimum amount of signatures, and then people should be allowed to vote on it.
Yes, well, that's the whole reason you have an election in the
right.
You bring this question to the people. And it's sitting now on the governor's desk to decide if he's going to sign into law or to veto it. Who knows? Things could be happening as we've gone live. But Matt, I just put this in the chat. Luke Mayville, a good friend, and
you'll see him in a second. Actually,
yeah, you'll see him in a second in this documentary. Wrote an op-ed in the Sandpoint Reader about citizen initiatives. If you have that up, I just wanted to note a couple things from it. The truth about citizen initiatives. Military terms, a smoke screen is a cloud of smoke used to hide the movement of military units such as infantry or tanks. In politics, a smoke screen is a phony argument used by politicians to hide their true intentions. And then he goes on to note SB 1110, which is a bill to basically make it impossible for them to have more ballot initiatives. Luke goes through some of the examples of the ballot initiatives. In 1994, voters enacted term limits with nearly 60% of the vote. The legislature reacted in 1997 by making it virtually impossible to qualify for initiatives for the ballot. A new law required that campaigns collect signatures not just from 6% of the voters statewide, but also from 6% of the voters in each of Idaho's 22 counties. In 2001, a federal court found the 22 county rule unconstitutional and struck it down. But in 2013, the successful Luna Laws referendum campaign that won in a massive landslide, the legislature once again attacked the initiative process and established the rule that signatures must be collected from 6% of the voters in each of the 18 different districts. The Luna Laws referendum campaign was broadly popular in rural and urban communities alike. Yet even back then, legislators used the urban versus rural smokescreen to justify the 18 district rule. He brings this up because the GOP is making the argument that these ballot initiatives allow, the urban parts of Idaho, like Boise, to dictate terms to the rest of the state. Through the ballot initiatives. This is the kind of argument. It's the same kind of GOP argument. They always try to find some, hit. It's the same thing with like the Electoral College, for example, where they argue that, it helps, it makes it so that like rural voters will have their voice heard versus right, which is right. BS. As we don't have time to get into that argument right now, but. Analysis after analysis has shown that it actually does not expand the amount of time that politicians spend in other parts of the country. They really just focus on a few key states,
right?
It's not something that's really bringing a lot of people into the fold, because there's a hell of a lot of rural people in Texas and New York and California too, who don't get hurt by that system either. But anyways, not to get focused on that. He then goes on to show that all of these ballot initiatives that have passed won with support of urban and rural voters, particularly Prop 2, which expanded Medicaid access. This kind of divide between urban and rural voters on making sure that people have access to healthcare through Medicaid, who need it, was a non-factor. And it's a really important point to make. And they have to continue to make this point to not allow the GOP to basically, push lies against a democratic process. Because that's what these ballot initiatives are, and what this movement really was about, was reclaiming democracy.
Yeah, and it won, and so they're going to try to fight. And did you say the status of that bill? I think Luke has his own initiative countering it, ready to go.
I know they're prepared to counter it if it goes into effect, but I think as of coming into this, it hasn't been signed by the governor yet. But so this is the last push to try to get the governor to veto it.
Hopefully he vetoes it.
Yeah.
With that said, shall we go to this interview? It will start with Luke's triumphant speech. Really, emotional stuff, to hear him talk about the significance of what they accomplished there. And then it'll go right into the interview. And David and I will be back after that. It's about 30 minutes. So we'll see you then.
September 1st, 2015, 3 years ago, someone named Jenny Steinke of Idaho Falls died tragically from a severe asthma attack. She didn't have to die. She died, Jenny Steinke, because she couldn't afford a new inhaler. And for 6 years, all across the state, 62,000 people have suffered in this Medicaid gap. They've gone without health insurance, and that means they've lived with the knowledge that if they get sick, their world could fall apart. And for 6 years, so many of their legislators, the majority of the people who claim to represent them, left them in the cold, left them without health insurance. For 6 years, they were marginalized. They were neglected. They were forgotten. But tonight, they are not neglected. They're not forgotten. They're not unheard. They're not unseen. Tonight, they are lawmakers. Because tonight they voted for Prop 2, and tonight Medicaid expansion is the law of the land. So, and this is important because of what you all did, there are 62,000 human beings who will know, for many of them for the first time in their lives, the peace of mind that comes with reliable health insurance.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Left Reckoning, joined here by Matt as always. And I'm really thrilled to be joined by Jim Camusi and Laura Wing Camusi, who are the directors of a new documentary that you definitely need to be checking out very soon called Reclaim Idaho. How are y'all doing today?
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I just wanted to open up with this quick little story here, because we're going to talk about this documentary and this really historic fight. And this documentary really captures not only like the importance of the political movement here, but also the kind of social and human aspects of, fighting for people, and then especially fighting for people when it comes to healthcare. And I just wanted to open up because I know one of the people who's in this film, Luke Mayville. People who've been listening to this show, I'm sure, are familiar, and also with the Michael Brooks show. But I remember when Luke was first talking about this project, I got coffee with him. It was before he ended up introducing me to Michael Brooks, actually. But I was getting coffee with him, just sort of catching up after a couple of years. And he was like, Yeah, I think I'm going to take a little bit of time off of teaching here at Columbia, and I'm going to go off to Idaho, where I'm from. And my friends have this van, and we're going to drive around the van and try to get people Medicaid.
And you didn't immediately grab a camera and get on a plane?
Yeah.
I did not immediately get a camera grab on a plane. I remember thinking to myself, good luck, Luke, man. But he really knew what he was doing and was able to really help a lot of folks out. And I'm really proud to know him for that. But anyways, I want to talk about this film, and how did y'all get introduced to this too? Because I'm sure when it got pitched to y'all, it was a little bit of, okay, what's going on here moment.
Yeah. So we found out about Reclaim Idaho through Tim Faust, who is hopefully somebody that your audience is familiar with. He's an amazing healthcare advocate and author. And we've been talking to him about, trying to figure out some kind of documentary that we could work on together. And one day he called us up and told us about Reclaim Idaho and in a very Tim type fashion said, it's extraordinary. You have to come right now. So we got on a plane about 2 weeks later and went out to Idaho and started shooting.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, what was that experience like for y'all getting into it? Just because y'all had never been to Idaho before. No. So you really didn't know what to expect other than the fact that, these people are really taking on this big task. And just for folks who aren't familiar with this film. Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
I just want to say, even folks that were there, for instance, the Democratic Party also thought maybe you should expect a much worse thing. So, yeah, I guess what were you expecting versus what you actually were able to document when you were there?
Oh, yeah. That's the big question, right?
And maybe just fill in the lines at what I'm alluding to there with the Democrat.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we didn't, frankly, we had no connection to Idaho at all. So we didn't know anything about it, short of what we may have picked up from, just sort of ambient awareness of it, that we knew it was an incredibly conservative place.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to say.
Yeah.
So we figured it was going to be, I guess to put it politely, hostile. We thought that there would be, that it was going to be a little uncomfortable, maybe at times a lot uncomfortable. But if you haven't seen the film, that wasn't the case. It was just tremendous. It was wonderful. And I think like in a lot of places, like they're people and they're lovely, so I think our expectations were completely blown out of the water from almost the moment we got off the plane.
Yeah, it was when Tim called us to tell us about it, I was like, I didn't quite know what to make of it because he was talking it up so much and he was saying, they're going to win. And I was like,
that doesn't scam.
Like, this doesn't make any sense. I feel like, we sort of have this narrative that we're fed about what like a red state is and what people in red states are like, and I think that we get a lot of information from, every media outlet, right? Like it's not just Fox, it's all of them that are kind of pushing this, this narrative of like hate and division and all this sort of stuff. And so we really expected a much more, I don't know, difficult environment. But yeah, it's not like that. And I think that was a huge eye-opening moment for us both, politically and for the film.
I think that's the most sort of radical message the film has that counters the narratives you have about like reactionary narratives about people in general. Like they are just closed-minded, and that actually you can believe in them, and it's really a function of other things like media cultures that have you believing in these red state, blue state divides.
Yeah, and like that's a big part and project of this show. Is sort of pushing back against that because like being somebody from Texas and also who lived in South Carolina, I'd always get annoyed when you talk to folks, especially lefties and socialists, when they're talking about like big national strategies. This kind of idea is like, oh, we have to win radical things in places like California and New York, and then maybe it will spread to the rest of the country. And that always infuriated me a little bit because it's one of those things. It's like, okay, well, what about my family and my people? You just have to wait around for generations and generations. But
I want to make sure that everybody who's listening to this is getting the sense of what we're talking about here. So y'all go to Idaho to cover this campaign for Prop 2. Could you explain sort of what that is and what the fight was about there?
Sure. Do you want me to go into that?
Yeah, Ron, go for it.
Yeah. So I'll just back it up a little bit to the Affordable Care Act. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed, there were multiple states that, and GOP run states that tried to overturn it in various ways. And there were a number of lawsuits. One of the things that was really important to the Affordable Care Act and was arguably like the best part of it was this Medicaid expansion, which was a measure that would open up Medicaid to everyone making under, I believe it was 138% or 35% of the federal poverty line. So that would open up Medicaid to a lot more people. Previously to that, it was basically impossible to get. You had to be destitute or disabled, and
it was just incredibly difficult.
It was
almost impossible.
Really hard. So unfortunately, through all these lawsuits, Medicaid expansion went from something that was a mandate to something that states had to opt into. So Idaho was one of a number of states that didn't opt in. Because of that, there was an estimated somewhere in between 60,000 to 100,000 low-income Idahoans who basically had no health insurance, no access to it, no way to buy it. They made too much for Medicaid, which in Idaho for a family of 4 was $5,000 a year, which
oh my Lord.
After all of this time working on this project, that is a number that still blows my mind.
Yeah, it's still,
so I can't,
every time I hear it,
I can't wrap my head around that at all. But if you were making between $5,000 a year and $25,000 a year, you were in this Medicaid gap and had no access to health insurance.
So
which,
you couldn't,
by the way,
you couldn't get you couldn't get Medicaid, and you're certainly not earning enough money to buy health insurance on the market. And you're also not earning enough money to qualify for subsidies.
No, you're earning too much to qualify. Wait, you're not earning enough to qualify.
You're not earning enough to qualify for subsidies. So you're making too much for Medicaid, but not enough for subsidies, but clearly not enough to be able to afford this on the market, which is why they wanted to close the gap. Because it's just, if it sounds confusing and stupid, it's because it is confusing and stupid. That's why they wanted to close it. Like it's still, just talking about it after becoming so familiar with it, it's still just insane to me that this thing exists and still exists in 10 states, 12, 14, however many are left that are still
including
holding the line
Texas.
on Medicaid.
Yeah, still fight here.
And a huge fight in Texas. There are 2.2 million people nationwide who are still in that Medicaid gap. The majority of them are in Texas.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's it's not surprising just because of the size and just the war that the GOP wages on people in the state. And I would also just want to phrase this politically in the sense too. It's like, this is a war not just on poor people. This is like a war quite literally on working people, right? Because to get into that gap, you have to be somebody who's working on some capacity. To not be able to have access to these programs.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the things that really resonated with the people of Idaho, which is that a lot of people know they have an understanding of what this problem is, and they know what it means to work your ass off full time and still you don't have health insurance benefits from your job, and you sure as hell aren't making enough to be able to buy it. So people understood the problem in a very real way, right? Like this wasn't there. So even when you were talking to, or when they were talking to conservatives or Republicans, this phantom moocher who's somehow, taking advantage of the system to go see a doctor, they know that doesn't exist,
And it was because you were talking to people, people were being spoken to like in their communities. And, so there's Prop 2, which is, an initiative that goes up. And basically what Reclaim Idaho is it's a group, with Luke, Garrett, Emily, and Timothy. And they get this beat up van and they're going all across the state, not just in areas that they think are, slam dunks for this move, right?
Yeah, that's right. One of the interesting things about Idaho, and we can get into this too because they're trying to make it even harder, is that it's really, really hard to get a ballot initiative on the ballot. You have to have signatures from almost every county. And, Idaho is a very rural place. People are really spread out. So it was definitely necessary for them to have, some kind of vehicle to get around, just to talk to people.
It was a heavy lift just to get the ballot for a vote.
Yeah.
There was a huge effort to get that done.
And the rationale behind sort of restricting that is the sort of rhetoric behind, like, we don't want to just those college kids in Boise determining this, right? Is that basically what?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. And I think a lot of that is also there's this idea that rural voters are somehow extremely conservative and don't want any public services and don't want anything from the big bad government, and of course that's not true.
I mean, it may be true in some cases, but it certainly wasn't true across the board with this measure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the way we billion in this country, it's the big city hospitals that have all the, expensive stuff that you can really get those kickbacks from. And the rural hospitals going out of business. So yeah, this is definitely not a urban rural issue.
No,
and
definitely not.
And I think one of the really, smart things that is core to how Luke views politics and how to engage is to get out and talk to everybody, to not and they were all on the same page. This idea of, like, you need to talk to everyone. You can't just try to this thing that maybe they're afraid of. They're going to overwhelm us because of the numbers in Boise. You don't have to worry about that if you find support all over the place. If you go out and you talk to people outside of maybe a more liberal center. It becomes a more durable thing, and it becomes something that has widespread support. And then people don't feel like they've had something forced on them by people in a big city or something. Yeah. They had a hand in it, a direct hand in it.
Yeah.
Right.
And one thing that really was striking to me, whenever I talked to Luke about this, is, he makes the point that when they were first sort of, kicking this idea around, they talked to some, strategists, and they were telling them, like, okay, well, you need to hire a big, money consultant to do this. And I can't remember what the figure was, but it was like, okay, well, we can't do that. And instead what they said is, like, well, we're just going to talk to people, and we're going to get people to volunteer and talk to their neighbors. And it was very much like a wildfire kind of experience, right? Where by getting people engaged and then saying, okay, now take this to folks yourselves, you it's exponential how many people you can get motivated to showing up and knocking on doors for you versus just spending a lot of money on ads.
Absolutely. And I think, there have been similar efforts to, have Medicaid expansion on the ballot in different states. Some of them have been successful, some of them haven't. And the difference between Reclaim Idaho and a lot of those other campaigns is exactly what you just said. It's that grassroots element, that really true, not AstroTurf, real grassroots element. And they had 2,000 volunteers across the state by the end of the campain. That's
amazing.
An insane amount of people
insane,
anywhere, but in Idaho, that's incredible. And I think that they really made an effort to meet people where they were,
literally in their own
homes, and they spoke to them in ways that were really genuine, and in ways that were just deeply empathetic.
I was really struck by that. That was, and I think maybe Tim also, who was another outsider, so to speak, was also struck by this sort of sense of empathy and kindness, and they never knocked on a single door expecting a fight or looking for a fight. And you'd think that would be I don't know, instinctively, or just like a reflex. You just expect the door to get slammed in your face, and they never expected it. They never did.
There's a mention early where the organizers are talking about not getting anywhere with posting and tweeting and stuff like that, and actually getting into people's homes. And like you said, it reminds me of the North Dakota. I'm from North Dakota. The Nonpartisan League, which helped establish the state grain elevator and state bank that helped me study abroad. That was originally AC Townley, the organizer. He famously drove from farm to farm on a Model T, and it became like a sort of icon of that. So it's funny how it's you have to get out and amongst the people, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it sounds cheesy. It sounds like, I don't know, naive or hokey, but it's like, it's real. It worked.
Yeah. And it's funny that it was contrasted with the consultant, because you hear about the Democratic Party like preferring consultants, obviously, because that's where that's good money. Like you make hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a campaign for messaging, whereas you could just get out there and message to people and actually get real-time info. You could put all these buzzwords on it, on how you're actually doing, how you're being received. Those are probably the best metrics than whatever that some consultant in DC is going to get you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of those consultants, bless them, but I think that look, I don't want to trash the Democratic Party here, because I think that especially in a place like Idaho, they are sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think that the traditional party politics, are really difficult there.
And you have examples like Dan Schmidt.
Yeah, like Dan Schmidt, who's in the films, and a Democrat, ex-state senator, tried his best, couldn't get anywhere. They needed to take it to the people. And I think
he was right on board. He's like, I tried to do this through the machine and it didn't work. What you guys are doing, you're advanced. So he threw himself into that,
But having given all of those disclaimers, I do think that some of these consultants, it's in their best interest to kind of keep the fight up, right? Like to keep up these divisions. And like Jim said, it sounds hokey to sort of talk about unity and things like that. But I think that the thing that this film really proves is that unity is possible when you talk to people about policy that improves their material conditions and can actually make their lives better. I think that's where unity is.
And party completely removed from the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They talked about the program. They didn't talk about, party stuff, which was, I think, smart and helped with their conversations. But like, even this, like, the consultant thing is also like, it's really appealing because it's easy, right? You like click, we just reached 500,000 people. That's not the same as like Emily getting a text message from somebody telling her to go soak her head and her going, ha ha ha, but really, you want to grab a beer and talk about this thing? And being sincere about it. It's like there's more depth to it when it's face to face.
And it's really about like expanding democracy too, in the sense that like it's a process and people are having conversations with one another. Where a lot of times when you're doing party politics, especially like the way the Democratic Party operates, it's very much about managing democracy. As y'all know, in New York, it's a blue place, but it's hard to vote there and all these things. And it's because they want to make sure that they have the right Democratic voter. They don't really want, everybody to show up and being involved, right? So it's like
we're in New York City and our primary votes.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Primary.
Whoops.
So this is why this film really, I think, is so powerful, because it really does capture that feeling of like reigniting, and again, not to be cheesy, but like reigniting like that like democratic like process, that feeling of like, democracy and elections are about knocking on doors and talking to your neighbors rather than attack ads or things like that. In the last couple of minutes, I'm very curious if you have anything to say on that too, obviously, but I'd be curious to hear about like the actual process of making the film, because we do have a lot of listeners who are involved in that, and this seems to be quite a task to get all this footage done as the time frame that you all were there for.
So this was a pretty I would say that the film was equally as grassroots as the campaign. We really didn't have much of a pre-production process. We didn't have a lot of time. Like I said, we were out there within 2 weeks of finding out about the campaign. So we just took the equipment that we had, that we owned.
Which is like worth it. Like we're a tiny production company.
Yeah.
We do like little, just work. We know how to handle cameras. We know how to deal with hard drives and these sorts of things. So there's already sort of
there was a baseline.
There's a foundation for being able to swing a lens.
But yeah, so we kind of just pointed the lens and kept rolling. That was really the philosophy there.
We could have been going out there to get a really depressing story. We didn't know.
Yeah, we didn't know.
We didn't know. So it's like, well, if you don't know and we don't have much of a plan, you just got to start rolling as much as you can.
But it was a really interesting process. We didn't really know we didn't know about Idaho. As we said, we didn't really know where we were going. We didn't really know what was going to happen every day. We just kind of went with it. We also, in a kind of an interesting moment, and she makes a couple of little cameos in the film in the back of her head. Our daughter was with us, and she was 5 at the time, and she was not excited about local Idaho babysitters, and decided she needed to come with us everywhere we went.
She wasn't excited about babysitters anywhere on Earth.
It was like
not
at 5,
She was excited about what Reclaim Idaho was doing, because we explained to her that some people can't see a doctor, and what a surprise, a child was horrified by that.
Oh man, that's
So there were a lot of moments where one of us would be filming and she's literally like standing there next
that's incredible,
which made it all kind of hard to concentrate sometimes, but also it was amazing. It was an amazing experience as a parent, just having your child there. It was really cool.
Because you really do feel like the community of that van. And I think that's really important for people who haven't seen or van or camper, who haven't seen the film. Definitely we'll tell everyone how they can find it and watch it in a second.
Yeah.
But you do feel that camaraderie. And like one moment I love in the film is like at the very end of it, as they're coming through, it's like, and y'all catch the last voter, right? Like the last person who shows up at the poll. And I think it was Garrett. Somebody's like, did you catch that? Did you get that? And then someone's like, yes. And he's like, hell yeah, that was awesome.
Yep. Shot on a phone.
Amazing.
Shot on a phone.
Really? That's incredible.
Just had to grab it and get out there, and didn't want to be shoving a camera in people's faces at that moment, because everybody was kind of keyed up. So just kept it as low profile as we could. Use the tools that you have available.
Yeah, definitely. We're not snobby about gear.
No, whatever gets the job
just tell the story.
We should just say one political note going on in Idaho now is they are trying to restrict even further this ballot initiative process. Are you guys up to speed on that? Where are they at with that? Because people are organizing against that.
I mean, it's straight up, voter suppression. It's a different flavor of voter suppression than I think we're used to. They're kind of end running around it, but yeah. So that bill, which will restrict ballot access to, it's draconian. You have to get signatures from every single county in Idaho now, which is something that very few campaigns are going to have the capability to do.
Was it prior 60% or something?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was
already pretty tough.
It was already pretty tough. They're making it even harder. They're basically making it impossible.
Because they don't want what happened to happen again.
No. So that bill is sitting on the governor of Idaho's desk right now, waiting for him to, either sign it or veto it. Reclaim Idaho is prepared with a new ballot initiative that they will go out and try to get signatures for, that will make
it's a ballot initiative.
It's a ballot initiative to give us back ballot initiatives, basically.
But right now, Luke is trying to get the people of Idaho to pressure the governor to veto the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're listening
right now,
to this,
as we speak, I honestly he may or may not have chosen to do so 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. So if you're in Idaho and you're listening to this, please call the governor and give him your thoughts, because this is nonsense.
Yeah, well, with clear intent, just to suppress, democracy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. No question about it.
And Reclaim Idaho has done a ton of research into this, and there's absolutely no evidence that the rural people of Idaho want this. And the GOP is sitting there saying, "This is for you, rural voters. No one's talking to you." It's just a lie. It's just a lie. So
we got it on camera. People are talking to them. I mean,
it's true.
Film about it.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, I really appreciate y'all taking the time to join us. How can everybody see the film, and what's the process? I know COVID obviously makes all these things really difficult to premiere, but
yeah, it's really right now, if you just go to our website, which is reclaimidahofilm.com, you can sign up on our email list, and we'll let you know when screenings are coming up. We have a number of screenings coming up, through the spring, summer, and fall. And then eventually, hopefully, we'll get distribution on the streaming service, and everyone will be able to see it without a festival. But that's to come.
And with COVID, a lot of the festivals, hopefully, we get into 1 million of them. They're doing it virtually, so hopefully, there's a much wider audience that can access it than whoever happens to be in that town where that festival is happening. So there's hopefully going to be lots of opportunities to watch it.
Well, Jim and Laura, I really appreciate it. The website is reclaimidahofilm.com. Definitely check that out, and take care.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, guys.
It's a great movie.
September 1st, 2015.
Luke.
So good. Matt's watching it again in the background. That's what's going on.
Honestly, that Luke speech made me feel emotional, man. Like, I'm glad that was a successful outcome for those people. But yeah, like it reminded me of Home a little bit. Or Fargo specifically, the bit where they get the last voter in Sandy Point or Sandpoint out of the bar, which is, I love those sort of small town vibes. But yeah, people should check it out.
No, definitely find your way. Find a way to see the film as soon as you can. And sorry, y'all, for the audio. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's weird. It's usually fine, and then Zoom will just decide like we're going to f with your levels entirely. So,
well, yeah, but definitely check out the film Reclaim Idaho. That was a really beautiful moment, and it's just the kind of inspiration that I think a lot of folks really need right now.
Yeah.
Before we go to the post game, Matt, I wanted to, just sort of touch on the elections over last weekend. I don't know if you have any top line thoughts on, what happened in Ecuador. Obviously, it's a huge loss. I think that people.
I mean, I'm just curious about the thing. So the top lines I'm seeing in the mainstream press about it is it's a repudiation of Correísmo. And I'm curious about your take on that. It does, and that seems to wrap up a whole lot of other things in it. Like, for instance, Yaku Perez being a leftist candidate, but an anti-Correa candidate. Like, from that, when you factor in just that element of it, it seems like aroused to like there's a completely splintered left, right? So,
there was a significant amount of spoiled ballots too, because it's a country where you have to vote, but you can just vote inaccurately, so it doesn't count for anything. And Perez was pushing for spoiled ballot campaign,
right?
So it's one of those things where you realize what he's willing to play with. I mean, Lasso's come in and almost immediately has said, I want to bring the United States into Ecuador as much as possible. He wants to make sure that the country has no debt as a part of their, a part of their budget. And what he means by that is implementing extreme austerity in a country that is reeling from, was already in rough shape beforehand, but is even in worse shape after, the coronavirus. I mean, Perez, I think, is really nightmarish. And I think it is a real shame that they weren't able to figure something out. I'm talking about Arroz with dealing and bringing in more of the indigenous movement that did end up supporting Yaku Perez. Obviously, he was no help to that. I think that he very much was somebody who very clearly has no real allegiances to the left and quite frankly to just everyday people, if he's willing to play these kind of games to let right wingers come into power.
Well, Lasso's he's already talking about new oil deals. It's
so much for the anti-extractivist left, exactly, that they kept on calling themselves, while Arroz was trying to bring those into public control, public oversight as much as possible. That's one takeaway. I think I'd like to talk to some people more as we get more information. I mean, you can have your top line reactions, but you have to figure out and do a little bit more, research to understand what actually happened on election day, right? Because it felt polling was showing one thing. I will say there's some top line things that just have to be stated, just for folks who aren't familiar with the timeline. Oroz was almost not even going to be on the ballot, because there had been a prolonged lawfare attack against him and Correa, obviously, which is a whole other thing. They were trying to get Interpol, the international police force, to arrest Correa. And, Interpol is not some it's not an organization that is standing with the working class in general, right? But they even said that arresting Correa would be a violation of human rights. So like the kind of lawfare tactics that have been used against Correa and people around him are quite significant. I mean, he's one of those people. The case isn't like isn't very much akin to Lula, but he's one of those people where like they're saying like, oh, he's involved in corruption. They're like, okay, well, prove it. He says like, well, he used his they had some hilarious term like psychic influence. Correa had like psychic influence over corruption, right? So exactly. So it's one of those things. They don't have influence. All they can do is sort of create like a kind of general picture of somebody who was the leader of their country, who had a lot of people around him doing things, right? And say like, oh, he was sort of around at the time that things were happening, right? Complete bogus. So you have all of that. So this is October, by the way, that they had to fight to just make sure that Morales could be on the ballot, because they were trying to prevent him from being on the ballot again for no actual basis for any crimes or anything like that. Just trying to tie him up. And what comes with that is a lot of ammunition and an ability to smear him. And the entire media system in Ecuador, which is controlled by wealthy interests, was against him from the get-go. And campaigning, that means that you have a difficult choice you have to make. You can either push back against all the lies, right? Or campaign on your platform. Either way, you're exposing yourself. So that's like the kind of top line is like, this was a tough fight. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be a tough fight. And this isn't to attack around personally or like people who are running that campaign, but just like this is just like the stark reality. It's like we're just never going to have it. And the same thing with Bernie Sanders too. I'd make the same claims against Bernie Sanders. Like it's not against him or criticism of him. It's just like, okay, and like we're just never going to be on a playing field. We can complain about it. We can say like, well, this is why it would have taken a lot more to have won, but we just don't have that option at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think on that note, Arauz conceding immediately was probably his only play, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Right. Like, especially with these narratives that they're running with about the anti-democratic Correa psychic influence, right?
And I also think like to do some kind of more long-term analysis, Guillaume Long, who was one of like the great theorists and members of the Correa government, he had a really great conversation with Grace Blakely on her podcast. I'm blanking on the name right now. It's something Gramsci inspired, but I'll remember it later. Anyways, it's a great podcast. You should definitely check it out. But in the conversation, he was saying like one of the difficult things about building the politics that they did under Correa is that they tried to build this big tent movement, which meant that you were bringing in people who are business leaders and also some people who weren't necessarily very dedicated to like the idea of building socialism. And also when you're empowered, that if you're just somebody who's sort of like an upstart person who wants to be in the halls of power, okay, well then you join the party that's empowered to get closer to the halls of government. He was recognizing that was a problem with the movement, something that they were trying to rectify with this new campaign and the movements that were going on in Ecuador. But it's very clear that like there's a lot of work to be done to like kind of rebuild that working class and indigenous base. Not that it's in tatters and in shambles, but it definitely wasn't as strong as it needed to be to win.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, it seems that like that is just an evident, glaring problem. Like, if that schism can be fixed, I mean, it puts the left in a much stronger position, because that's, I guess, the assumption based on Jacobin eliminated from the first round of voting was, oh well, there'll be enough of that and Lasso will be toast, but.
Yeah,
it's
no, I mean, and I think that's like the other story too is like, I think Austin made a good point when we were talking, like it needs to be stated, like there was a resurgence of like indigenous power in this election. And I think that's something that is a positive thing and needs to be reckoned with. The unfortunate thing is being channeled with this through this like pretender and in my opinion, narcissist, somebody who like willfully has now put a lot of people at risk for extreme harm for his own like political career. A man who knows what other kind of influences that he has behind him. Again, just for people who are just tuning into this is somebody who cheered Lula's imprisonment. This is somebody who cheered when Evo Morales was ousted in a coup. This is not somebody who has deep roots in the left-wing movements in that part of the world. Anyways, those are the kind of like top lines lessons that have to be learned. It's tough because we're now seeing a kind of pushback against this resurgence of the left in the area. And it's tough to read, like what Evo was saying beforehand. This is, if this goes into effect, if Rose wins, like we are going to start working on building this Latin American like integration project, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just to sort of tease, though, the positive news that we saw a very different result in Peru, where Pedro Castillo ended up winning the first round, and he's going to go and have a runoff against Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter, for people who are not familiar with Peru, of a horrific pro-capitalist dictator who is in prison right now for human rights abuses during his term. Term is a loose word for somebody who was brutally holding on to power. And it's an exciting moment. I think also, and this goes from Ecuador to lots of other parts of Latin America as well. What's interesting here is that there is a pretty stark urban rural divide. And Pedro Castillo was not somebody who was very much favored. Like even, on this program, we were talking about Mendoza, who was sort of running, what more people were calling like the more like traditional left campaign there. That's people thought was going to be winning the left votes. I mean, this guy won, and I really wish we had this stuff prepped. Actually, like this is somebody who, like CNN, they didn't have.
Oh yeah.
They didn't have a photograph of him when he won because they didn't even.
He's looking like a player in a fighting game you've yet to unlock, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they had like the Super Smash Bros. Like Mewtwo, like cut out of him. He also, man, I'm trying to see if I'm sort of scrolling as we're going. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna send this to you actually, Max, because this is good.
I have the CNN thing. Is that if that's what
okay? No, I was gonna show you some of the videos of him because they're really good. Yeah, but put that up too because this is the kind of like mystery candidate thing. And then if you have this, I send it to you in the chat. This video too is really great of Pedro Castillo. But basically, he won overwhelmingly. If you go down as the Twitter one, if this is somebody who was somebody who won in large numbers in like the more rural areas and did not do very well in the major cities. And this is the point here, is that there's a very significant rural urban divide. It's in the chat, man. I just
the chat.
Yeah.
Oh god, I see it.
Yeah, because it's just a good video. So this is him, I think, just being cool as a cucumber here. If you pull this up, this is him being interviewed, as they're trying to like frenzy to talk to this candidate who somehow is the winner of the first round elections. Dude's just on his farm, like milking cows.
Okay.
I really like it a lot. He also, there's videos of him like coming in to vote, like on his
en Cajamarca con el candidato Pedro Castillo. Muy buenos días, Juan Carlos.
Hola, buenos días Pamela, muy buenos días a todo el país, aquí en Cajamarca, en la provincia de Chota, muy específicamente en el distrito de Anguía.
So this is perfect stuff. I will honestly say it's very much tailor-made for me. There's also videos of him.
Desde muy temprano en la chacra,
there's also videos of him like going in to vote and like riding in his horse, which as somebody who saw like the worst aspects of the Trump administration, like playing up that cowboy thing, I like having somebody on the left doing that. I thought that was really fun. But like to talk a little bit more like seriously about this, the party that he is a member of describes himself as Marxist-Leninist. He is gotten politics mainly. He's more famous for he's a school teacher and ran a very successful strike, teacher strike in the country. So that's really like his claim to fame there. And, so he has this kind of rootedness, but there's a piece that's in Jacobin by Liam Messner, who's somebody who should definitely follow on Twitter and keep up with his writings because he's a great writer and someone who covers this part of the world very well. He makes the point that there's a pushback here. There's a lot of corruption in Peru, and a lot of this was reaction against the corruption. Pedro Castillo, one of the first things that most people in the West have been talking about is the fact that he is left-wing economically, but holds socially conservative values. I think that these things are definitely things that should be wrestled with and taken seriously. I would say, though, that like you should be a little worried about how quickly those floated to the front of like Western English press. Not minimizing them, but there is a class of like international capital and wealthy folks who want you to be sort of supportive of a return to the Fujimori brutal neoliberal capitalist dictatorship system, and not somebody like Pedro Castillo, who and I actually made the mistake that I was criticizing all of these other publications for doing, front loading that. Instead of talking about why he would support, because this is somebody who wants to nationalize industries. This is somebody who wants to rewrite the Constitution, that was put into place by the dictatorship. And this is somebody who wants to increase access to democracy, right? This is somebody who was like running on a very radical campaign to do a lot of very positive things. And the way that it's basically has been covered so far has been fixating on, that kind of merger.
Yeah. I would also just say relativistically, like a social conservative, a Fujimori, like, okay.
And that and also like when we're saying socially conservative, it's like this is somebody being asked questions and giving answers on them versus somebody saying like my platform is to strip people of this, strip people of this rights, right? This is somebody who like when it comes to a lot of these questions, it said like I'd prefer the people to decide, but if you ask me my position on them, they're this, right? Again, it's not great. I'm not minimizing those struggles. I'm just saying that like it's being framed in a way to sort of poison the well to make you think that this is a bad development and not something that's positive.
You're contextualizing the emphasis. Yeah, exactly.
And but if you read this piece in Jacobin, and I'd like to be able to talk to somebody, maybe even if we could get Liam on, that'd be really great. He makes a good point here that this party has sort of like shot up, and Pedro Castillo's relationship with it is not like super rooted. And if anyone who's been watching the show, we talk a lot about how important it is to have rooted politics. It's not enough just to win an election, but you have to be able to, rely on that social mobilization to put your ideas into place, to develop, socialism, if that's what your goal is. Socialism is not just a set of policies. It is a process of moving from a capital system into a social system. And what you need to do as a socialist government is to help working people build the capacity to govern themselves and govern their own workplaces, right? So to be able to do that, you need the party structure. And the question here is not, and Liam's not saying that this is impossible, but he's saying it's not really there yet. So if there is a victory, even like there's a lot of organizing work that needs to be done to turn the Peru Libre Party into, an equivalent of like MOS, for example.
Interesting.
So it's definitely, we'll definitely do more to cover this, but I wanted to make sure that, people got our little, overview after these first two elections happened last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the cow video in itself is like inspiration.
Should
keep people going
I
for
was
the
pissed
weekend.
at myself for like, not having anything about him last week because like, man, this guy's very much tailor-made for like my sensibilities. But there's a lot. Well, I think we talked about Lula a little bit, and I think we should just tease it. We have some great Lula footage that should get the blood pumping and get you excited about the future that we'll put in the post game.
We'll also talk about the Hyperloop, or no, it's not. That's not the Hyperloop. The Musk tunnel. I don't. What's it called? The boring tunnel.
The worst subway ride with like fluorescent lights that you'll ever be on.
Absolute disaster.
With the worst people too.
Yes, exactly. Oh man. And yeah, we have some others. I want to hear, might have a little bit of a economic minute with talk about the tax gap and tax avoidance, because there's a big IRS thing that I want to play for David and see what he thinks about that. But yeah, patreon.com/leftreckoning, folks. If you want to get the think tank, you're going to need to go
think
there.
tank on Sunday. Well, thanks everybody. See you either at the post game or next week.
Peace.